Some of you may remember that I did a review in the past about an HDMI device called the Marseille mClassic. Basically what it does is upscale an image that it gets from a device and makes it look much better on a bigger screen, or more precisely, at a higher resolution than the device can output. There's some other processing that happens too, like anti-aliasing for example, and the thing is it adds no lag to the experience. I go into the details in my old review, but the reason I'm re-exploring this device again is because I didn't have a 4K screen at the time, but I do now. In the old review, the mClassic did a great job at 1080p. In fact, it was really great at upscaling 480 and 720p footage to 1080p. In this video, we'll use the Switch because out of all the consoles I regularly use, the games on that system look by far the worst on a 4K display. I recorded a bunch of footage and I can say that the mClassic upscaler makes a huge difference. Games look much nicer with far less pixelation and jagged edges. What's even more impressive is that the mClassic doesn't actually go up to 4K, but rather 2K or 1440p, as it's also known. That's enough to improve the visuals of most games immensely. Results are dependent on a variety of factors, like what resolution they run at, and also the art style of the game. Just so you know, this video is in 4K, but the footage is 2K. In other words, if you watch it on a 4K capable screen or device, you should be able to see how the games look like without the possibility of your TV, for example, upscaling the image. This is purely what the mClassic outputs. I'll clearly mark the footage so you know what you're looking at as well. I tried Mario Kart 8 Deluxe first. As far as I know, it runs at 1080p natively, and due to the art style, it ends up working very well. With the anti-aliasing, the edges are all nice and smooth, a very clear and crisp image. This is pretty much the ideal scenario. Non-realistic or cartoony art styles seem to work best. I'm assuming it has to do with the fact that generally with games like that, the edges of the objects are quite defined and visible, which makes it easy for the device. The mClassic also does sharpening. Mario Kart 8 doesn't do anisotropic filtering very well, so the road gets blurry very quick when you look ahead. I don't think the sharpening really does much here, and probably can't anyways. It's more of a way to make sure that the textures don't get more blurry when scaling the image up to a higher resolution. After that, I decided to try another Nintendo game next. Splatoon 2. It also has a cartoony style, but the main difference here is that the game runs at two different resolutions depending what you're doing. When you're running around in the plaza, the game runs at 1080p. We can see here that the results are similar to what we saw in Mario Kart 8. Everything looks nice and clear, but if you're playing in an actual game, or even if you're just in a store, the game switches to 720p because it needs to go down in order to run at 60 FPS. Without an upscaler, that resolution change is actually quite jarring, even with a 1080p monitor. With a 4K display, it's even worse. Thankfully, the mClassic does a really good job again, but it's not as sharp as the 1080p stuff we've been looking at before. The image in Splatoon 2 during gameplay is noticeably softer, and you do notice pixelation much more easily. The mClassic isn't magic, as you can see, but still it does a good job in making sure that the game looks less ugly. As a sort of midpoint between Splatoon and Mario Kart, I chose to try Zelda Breath of the Wild next. The game runs at 90, wow, that would be awful, 900p is what I meant to say, and it uses a cel-shaded art style. As expected, I got results somewhere in between the two earlier mentioned games. Pretty good, and overall I was quite satisfied. And because it looks similar, I also gave Pokemon Legends Arceus a try. Now, I don't really know what resolution it runs at. I think it changes depending what's going on in the game. In town, it does look like 1080p, and that's usually where I get the sharpest image. So like with Mario Kart 8, the upsampled 1440p image looks very nice and sharp. But other times when you're running around in the wilderness, the game seems to run possibly even below 720p, I'm not sure, maybe about there. Jagged edges, especially with the foliage, like grass, is actually quite noticeable, even after upsampling. Now onto a completely different looking game, The Witcher 3. Despite the monumental task of putting that game on the Switch, the graphics end up being quite blurry on the system. The upsampler didn't do a real good job here. At first I thought it wasn't on or something, the image was so blurry. This was by far the worst results I got with the mClassic. Another thing that's very noticeable here is the text. Note how blobby and undefined it is. This was very noticeable with some low resolution games like 480p games that I did in my old review, but this is the first time that this phenomenon occurred so visibly on my 4K TV. The game does have, dynamic resolution as far as I know. And also the text is very thin. And I think, yeah, it tries to kind of soften that all out, hence why it looks kind of blobby. Now, let's throw a bit of a curveball here. Galgun Double Piece. I just recently reviewed this game. It's a bit of a lewd rail shooter, which is also very funny. This game represents the small budget Japanese sort of production, like niche Japanese games. I thought this one was interesting because despite the anime art style, results weren't as good as they were with the Nintendo games, for example. Galgun runs at below 1080p. I'm not sure exactly what, but it's definitely not 1080p. The menus never looked amazing. There was always like some pixeliness going on, but with the mClassic, there was a lot of detail that was restored. Text and other UI bits also benefited from the device's processing. So overall, that was quite good actually. The thing that makes Galgun not work out so great is its own primitive handling of graphical things in the 3D realm. There's a lot of bloom going on, and that doesn't really help. It makes the image more undefined, and the mClassic doesn't really change that. Another thing is that the game just doesn't handle edges well. For example, the characters have a noticeable but very thin black outline. The problem is that there's just too little information there to work with, so the thin line remains broken and jagged looking in the original footage, and in the upscaled footage it basically looks the same. This happens not just with characters, but other environmental elements. So yeah, this one's a great example of a game with a stylistic look that doesn't benefit as much as one would think. Lastly, I gave Super Mario Odyssey a shot. I'm not going to dwell so much on this one, because I got similar results as the other Nintendo games that aren't quite 1080p. We already went over those and there's nothing really new. But hey, I recorded it, so here is some footage, and you get to look at it, I guess. Would be a waste if I didn't show you. Plus, it's something to soothe your eyes if you weren't a fan of the staircase effect from Galgun. But overall, I do recommend looking at the Marseille mClassic if you have a 4K or 1440 display. It certainly helps make the games look much better. Obviously, it won't fix performance issues, though. And like we established, it's not magic, so it's not gonna fix all of your visual problems. But it'll at least fix something, So yeah, I think it's a device worth looking into. Just so you know, whenever I film or play games for reviews, I don't use the mClassic, so that way I get to experience things exactly as the Switch outputs them. But when playing games just for myself, the mClassic really helps. I hope you found that helpful, or at least interesting. Check out the Patreon page if you're interested in supporting the channel. You can watch videos before they come out, usually like a day or two before. And you also get exclusive news updates, so you'll always know what videos to expect in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.